Alright everybody, so today's video I want to talk about row spacing. Got a question for everybody. Basically, I'm going to discuss a few things here and see what you all have for an input on it. Have some ideas we've been thinking about, but there's not a lot of information that I'm finding on the subject. You find stuff here and there, but not a whole lot, let's say. So we're considering adjusting our corn planter from 30-inch rows back to 36. What, you say? I'm going to tell you the reasoning behind that. So my 40-20 is set for wide row spacing, which 36 row in today's terms is considered wide row. The thinking behind this is that I can use the 40-20 for spraying, for broadcasting urea, for broadcast seeding cover crops earlier. That's the key. The key here is cover crops earlier. With the 6400 being my main tractor right now, I don't want to have to do what I've been doing in the past and have to unhook it from the baler, hook to the sprayer, hook to the fertilizer spreader, any of that stuff, because it never fails. Every time I unhook it to go spray my corn, one of the customers that I have calls, wants me to come custom bale. It gets to be kind of a pain in the butt, hooking and unhooking from the baler all the time. So I could go and adjust the 40-20 down for narrow row, but being it doesn't have any rollover protection, it has a loader, and I farm hills, I'm not comfortable narrowing it up. And the other reasoning for going to 36-inch rows, this is my thinking, is that extra 6 inches of row spacing will give a cover crop a little bit more time to get established underneath the corn before the corn canopies. Now, it's been a long time since I've grown 36-inch row corn, so I don't remember the canopying part of it that well. So I'm not for sure how this is all how it would all play out. But the thinking behind it is, the little bit of information that I have found suggests over a 5-year test that the difference between 30-inch row and 36-inch row is a 2.5% less yield. So 2.5% less yield on your corn. Now, that is corn grain. I did not find any studies that discussed silage differences, yield differences, tonnage-wise. So, I don't know what we could potentially lose going to that. And in that 5-year study, 3 out of the 5 years didn't show a yield difference at all. But that was only one university. I didn't find very many other studies that gave a very good example of what happens. So with that being said, my thinking is, or my reasoning to try it is, I can use the 40-20 now for doing that and free up the 6400 for other stuff. I can broadcast my cover crops in at V4, V5, whatever, to hopefully relieve some of the stress come fall with trying to get cover crops planted early enough that they actually grow. As many of you know, this year we've been froze now for over a month, and I don't know if any of the cover crops that I planted behind any of the corn or the beans is going to grow. People have told me, oh, it'll germinate in the spring, which I'm hoping it does. But the biggest part, or the worst part about waiting until spring for it to germinate is how long it's going to be before it's ready to cut for forage, and how far back it's going to set planting corn to get a decent yield off the rye is my biggest concern right now. So I think if I can get it to where I can broadcast the rye in the end of June, early July, you know, where it's still going to germinate, but the corn's going to canopy soon enough that that rye is just kind of going to hang out underneath there, kind of dormant. It'll already be established, so it will get rid of that stress and worry and work of trying to get it done in the fall. And if we get it planted at that time, we don't have to worry about trying to get our corn off earlier so we can get the rye planted. The rye will already be there. We can wait till after a freeze to combine, to shred stalks and bale stalks. If the corn dries down early enough, it gives us more option for fall grazing. So, like the fields back here that I can easily graze, even the corn silage. Sure, behind corn silage, there's typically enough time to plant it, enough time for it to grow, and enough time to graze it. But if we can be that much farther ahead and already have it growing before we chop, and as soon as the corn silage comes off, it's already growing, it'll be that much more by the time we do graze it. So hopefully we can extend our grazing period that way. And then the other fields behind the house here that are going to be corn, once that corn starts drying down, that winter rye is going to grow faster because it's going to start seeing more sunlight. So that gives us, let's say, the end of September, early October, it starts drying down. That rye is already growing. If we can harvest our corn mid-October, get the stalks off, or even let the cows out there, they can graze the stalks and the winter rye, and just push back, shredding the rest of the stalks until November or whatever. If we can watch the weather, and they say that we're going to have bad weather in a week, that we can plan that we'll make our corn stalks right before that bad weather and we'll be done. I think it's going to give me more options, and I say me, I mean any of us can do this. I just think it'll give more options in the fall for more grazing, and the longer those cows harvest their own forage, the more money stays in my pocket by not feeding stored feed, you know, and it might translate to needing less feed to put up during the summer for them, or it might translate to more cows. You never know. But I think with this route, I think that the potential to get enough forage off of the ground I have before we even plant corn, I think that it would allow me to still raise the corn that I sell as a cash crop now, plus grow the herd, instead of looking at seeding down a bunch of ground to get hay so we know that we have enough forage to feed all these animals out and keep the cows fed over the winter and what have you. So I don't know, does anybody have any thoughts or experience when you went from narrow or from wide row to narrow row, or you know what your thinking is on it? Because the few disadvantages I could see are possibly lower corn yield, but that could be offset by a higher rye yield come spring for forage. Whether we chop it, whether we bale it for baleage, or whether we graze it, you know, there should be more available forage in the fall, so there's a benefit. Hopefully come spring it'll be farther ahead, and hopefully it matures faster in the spring, gets to where we want it before we chop it. So there's a benefit. Do those benefits offset a little bit of a yield loss on the corn? We don't know for sure. We gotta experiment, actually do it, and see what happens. The other disadvantage that could possibly be a problem would be that we might not have as good of weed control. Now, if, let's just say we broadcast, but you know, right before it's knee high, that might be too late, I don't know. But if we go through and spray, kill everything that's there, you know, all the grasses and what have you that are growing, burn them down, come back 2-3 days later and broadcast our cover crops into it, hopefully they get growing and they will hopefully suppress the weeds, because it's, with the whole timing, typically the corn canopy is enough that you don't have to worry about the weeds in after it canopies. But hopefully those cover crops would help suppress any weeds that do manage to break out, hold them back, and then come fall, those cover crops will be ahead of the weeds and they'll help keep the weeds back. So I don't know if that's going to be an issue. It's to be determined, I guess, or to be experienced or experiment with or whatever. But now for me, this isn't going to be the case with everybody, I understand. But for me, it would only take about an hour to adjust the corn planter. It's just a matter of loosening up the frame bolts, the clamps, using a floor jack and adjusting them. And it would be real easy for me to weld some stops on, so I could easily get them back to 30-inch rows, and then set them out to 36 and weld on a couple tabs. So those are stops, and you can easily go back and forth from wide to narrow row. The other thing I'd have to do is recalibrate my new acre meter, which wouldn't be very hard to do. And honestly, I already know the gear combination for narrow 30-inch rows. Once we set it to 36-inch rows, once I get that calibrated, we'd already know which gear combination to use there. So that's not a big deal. I have a 4-row narrow and a 4-row wide corn head for my combine. You know, I bought that 4-row wide for doing custom work for one guy, and he's still planting wide row. He has no thoughts as of right now of going to narrow row, because he doesn't think that it would pay, which he might be right, I don't know. But the chopper, I have the 1-row head that works on wide and narrow row, obviously. I have the 2-row wide that we could fix. We could change those 2 gears and we could put that new bearing in it, or those old 2-row wide heads are a dime a dozen. I mean, I can pick another one of them up cheap. And the corn picker's wide row, which you've seen that I pick wide or narrow row corn with the wide row head. It can be done. It just, you got to go a little bit slower and you got to be more careful. So for me, it's not going to cost me anything equipment wise to do this experiment. I don't know for sure, like I said, what the yield difference would be. But even if we say that we have, you know, that 5% yield loss, I still think that with what we're what we could potentially gain in the cover crops and the extended grazing and the more forage in the spring, the less stress come fall about trying to get the stuff in the ground than worrying that it's going to come out of the ground and all that stuff. I think that little bit of a loss would be offset by these other things. So I don't know, it's something we're going to try. I don't think I would be out much by doing it. You know, I don't base my income off of what my corn crop is per se. I make most of my living is from the cattle. It's not from selling the corn. That is just an added bonus. So I think to ensure that we have more grazing, that we have that cover crop available in the spring, which now isn't really a cover crop anymore. Now it's a forage crop before a corn crop. I think to have those that we know they're going to be there, we know they're going to be established, we know they're going to be able to be harvested, I think that that would outweigh the disadvantages of potentially losing some bushels. So, I don't know. What do you guys think? Is there anybody else that is trying to extend your grazing and interested in trying it too? Or are you already planting that row? Do you broadcast cover crops into a standing corn crop? How does it work for you? You know, the aerial apply cover crops here, and a lot of the times they do it just before silage harvest, so that way it's already there. So when the silage comes off, it's already started to grow, so it grows that much faster. Once it sees the sunlight, it really takes off. But there's not a lot of guys that are doing it around here because the cost of the aerial application sounds like it's fairly expensive. And in certain places they won't apply it because of the hills and the woods and the trees and the power lines and whatever else. So that's where it doesn't really work for me, because I'm in a bowl and it's really hard to get an airplane in. So I can't really do that aerial application. So I have to resort back to a spinner spreader behind the tractor. So that's what I'm going to try. I have that big herd spreader. I don't know if we're going to use that. I'm kind of looking at buying a new spinner spreader that's a little bit smaller and easier to work with, because that spreader is a monster and it's not the easiest to work with. So that is one piece of equipment that I would have to buy, but that could be used for many different applications, you know. So, and that spinner spreader, I think at Fleet Farm was like $500, if that. So it's not that expensive. And then I could use that for putting fertilizer on the pastures if I ever so decide to. Right now, I just try to pull the fertilizer spreader around as much of it as I can. So I don't know that I'd really need that, but there might be areas that it's hard to get the fertilizer spreader through, where I could just put that on the back of the 4020 and go spin on fertilizer. So anyways, what are your guys' thoughts, inputs, any suggestions, any experience that you guys have that I should know about to take into consideration before I start doing this? Let me know. So anyways, with that, let me know what you guys think. Stay tuned for more. We'll catch you on the next one. See ya.